Hello everybody, Rev Ron here at Coburg Uniting Church in the heart of the ghetto, the northern suburbs of Melbourne. We send you our best wishes and pray a blessing upon you from our little church family here, and welcome. Today we're talking about becoming an authority for your own life, what that means, and how eternity pours itself into the world, or perhaps more accurately, eternity is revealed as this energetic that is in all living things and gives us the power to live our life with a good meaning and to come back to our true spiritual selves, one that is wise and just. So welcome.
Question 1 for today, Ronnie. Why do we compulsively serve the machine?
Thanks, Josh. With our Good Friday and Easter services, we've been talking about the machine, so I'll explain that first. Again, the machine is something that the late great Joseph Campbell talked about in his book, The Power of Myth, but it's highly relevant for we who live in this era of multinational corporations and nation states that seem unresponsive to the working man and working woman. Machine in mythology is a state, a corporation, a family, a religion, or a dominant person. And they can become machine-like when they're unresponsive and irrational. And when the family or the corporation become devoid of compassion, become destructive, unjustly sacrificing others for the well-being of the machine. The example of how we can become a cog, nothing more than a mere cog in the machine, robbed of our heart and humanity, is captured so beautifully in the film Star Wars. One of my favorites, perhaps, I think a favorite of many. George Lucas, who wrote the screenplay, at least for the first Star Wars, consulted deeply and extensively with Joseph Campbell on the symbols of the hero's journey of moving from an inauthentic life to a life of maturity and becoming an authority for your own life, as opposed to someone who's just a nut or bolt in the machine. The example in the Star Wars is that of the figure of Darth Vader. You might recall that Darth Vader is a representative of the machine-like state, in that case being the Death Star. And humanity proceeds not from the Death Star, or in our case from a multinational corporation, but from the heart and from wisdom and compassion. When Luke Skywalker, at one moment in the film Star Wars, unmasks his father, he is taking off the machine role that Darth Vader has played. You might recall that when he does so, Darth Vader has nothing but his face is a gooey mess. Again, it's symbolic in that it's like the person who has no individuation, no definition to their personality. They don't have a solid sense of self. They have never become an authority for their own life, but they're just responsive to the demands of the machine. So in Star Wars, Darth Vader the Father was the uniform. And he was advocating and advancing the interest of a totally destructive machine, the Death Star. That is one form of power. The state role, the machine role. But the Easter story reminds us that there is another form of power which is much deeper and broader. And it's that there is an energy field in all living things that can be evoked through our spiritual practices like prayer, meditation, acts of dissent against the machine-like state or corporation or person, where we reclaim our sense of self and of being a part of the family of all people. We all have a significant role to play. That's the story of Easter.
How does religious experience empower or disempower us?
Go back to something we talk a lot about here at Coburg Uniting, which is the historical Jesus, in stark contrast often with the Christ who has been imprisoned by the conservative church. The historical Jesus was not homophobic or anti-woman, and he was very cynical and disenchanted, I think, with men of power. We've been talking about the sort of machine-like situation that Jesus faced, that scholars have defined as the domination system. The domination system operating in the first century around Jerusalem and the surrounds. Of course, the Jews were members of an occupied state under the Roman Empire, and scholars have told us that they had the monkey on their back, they had the chip on their shoulder. They were, Jewish folks were still smarting from a loss of status, a lost glory, a prestige of the kingdom of King David was long gone. And their land was being taken off of them by ever-increasing rates of taxation. And so there were a lot of people who were faced, I suppose, as we are in this day of coronavirus, with losing their livelihood, their job, and losing this ancestral heritage, which was their property to sustain themselves and their families. It was in this emotional and psychological climate of great distress and upset that Jesus began preaching and his public ministry of healing the sick and then eventually kicking over the tables of the money changers. His words were directed to the house of Israel, which was smarting under the loss of status and freedom. His message focused on the need for a radical change in the inner attitude of the people. And Jesus realized with startling realism that if you have allowed another person to define the quality of your inner life, you have handed to them the keys to your destiny. And he realized that first, if you are to destroy a person or a people, you must first dominate them and break their spirit and sabotage their morale. In relation to family counseling that I often do in my role here and as a chaplain in the Army, I can see the machine-like state in terms of a person's development. That sometimes in their family of origin, other people in their family live their lives at the expense of other family members. And so certain members of family, if it's a dysfunctional situation, may not be allowed to actually hear the stories and notice the nurturing experiences that are already at work in their lives that come from that energy of love. And so the challenge then is to say, what is the spirituality that really speaks to that situation of domination? Jesus realized finally that it is a very small step, a tiny step, to go from being treated like you're worthless to believing it, to treating yourself like you're worthless. For him, it wasn't just Rome that was the great barrier of peace of mind. It was also the mental frame of people believing that they were invisible, that they were nobodies. The kind of spirituality, therefore, that Jesus promoted was seen in these marvelous stories from this season of Easter, like the breaking of the bread at Emmaus. They were stories about people not having a learned helplessness and waiting for a savior figure to come into their lives and rescue them from Rome or from their depression. But these stories, like Jesus being known to disciples and friends in the breaking of the bread, and Jesus breaking the bread and blessing it, and then in the story from Luke's gospel, he disappears from their eyes. But in that tiny moment, light was suddenly shed on their whole existence. And they realized that Jesus was far more significant than what they had thought. And when they looked at God, they could not look at God anymore without seeing the face of Jesus. Now, the so what of that is that when Jesus said, "Remember me," in the story of the Last Supper that he had with his disciples and friends, he breaks the bread, he raises the cup and say, "When you drink from this cup, remember me." So the Hebrew meaning of remember meant something far more than just an intellectual exercise or a head trip. To remember in the Hebrew meant to actually embody and to enact the values that someone else stood for, someone who's died. So it meant to bring forward their legacy in words and deeds, to work for justice, for example. So to embody, to enact, was to bless, and that's what Jesus meant when he asked, "Remember me. Remember what I stood for. Remember what I did." And bring the energy of your own personality to that. And bring that symphony of justice and righteousness, right relations, forward. And bring new life to those old words, to do justice and to love kindness. So, in the question of becoming an authority for your own life, it doesn't mean going it alone, because lone rangers don't survive in this world. But it means taking account of our traditions and realizing we don't have to do everything on our own, but to be critical of our own religious traditions. Jesus was not unblinking and accepting of everything that was dished out to him by the Pharisees and the scribes. He thought for himself, but he brought a new life and dynamism to his own religious traditions. And so should we. Specifically, and perhaps I don't mean to offend, but the Easter tradition of the resurrection of Jesus' dead body, the resurrection of the dead, is one area where old religious traditions really do need to come in for review and to be reappropriated. There are those who will believe the literal view that the Bible is a science book or a history book, which it's not. I would argue it's a love letter from God, and it's at least perhaps 2/3 a theological book, a statement of faith, and perhaps 1/3 history. There are those who will believe, and the majority of view within Christendom is that Jesus rose from the dead on the 3rd day at Easter. And all these stories about the empty tomb are literally true. There are different views of resurrection which are never spoken of in churches. The mainline view is that Jesus really did rise from the dead on Easter, on the 3rd day. But it's worth noting that when you look a little bit, you don't have to look very far afield to other religions, to other spiritual traditions, that there are also resurrections and virgin births and other things. When you look at part of my spiritual tradition, the Cherokee Nation in the United States, the Native American tradition of the Cherokees, there are also resurrections of Savior-like figures. When you look at the Greek mystery cults and the spiritual traditions of ancient Egypt, there are also stories of resurrection and virgin births. So you then begin to question, are we looking at a literal reading, or is this a symbol, a very important mythological symbol that recurs in most, if not all, religious traditions throughout the world is a longing of the human heart and of God's heart. When Jesus, in the legend, said, "I am the resurrection and the life," he never talked about himself like that. So the best scholarship, I think, indicates that was a post-Easter comment by the early church. But what we could interpret that to mean, and I am the resurrection and the life, when Jesus says that, it is a trumpet blast to say to the powers of tyranny and oppression, to the empire and the king, to say, if you strike me down physically, I will arise in my believers and followers in a way which you can never imagine. I will arise with more power and in spirit. And no one will be able to stop it. There is more than one kind of Christianity. The other view, the alternative view, is this: that when you study the traditions and the history of the Jewish faith, you will find that from about 300 BCE, about 300 years before the birth of Christ, when the Jewish homeland was ruled by, I think it was the Seleucids, the Greek kings, who were the successors of Alexander the Great. They ruled with sword and fire and blood over the Jews. It was in that period of about 300 BCE that the traditions of the resurrection of the body came into Jewish thinking. Because there were so many martyrs and heroes and protesters who laid down their lives, who hallowed the name of God by laying down their life and standing up against their Greek overlords. If you go back in history even before 300 BCE to about 600 BCE, in the writings of the prophet Ezekiel during the Babylonian captivity, you find that even there in Ezekiel chapter 37, you might recall the valley of dry bones. There's a story of a kind of resurrection of the slain of Israel, rising up from that death valley. Rising up from that barren wasteland, and flesh and sinew being put on the bones, the dry bones of the dead. So there, 600 years before the birth of Christ, in Jewish spiritual tradition, is the resurrection of the dead. The so what of that is that it was believed in Jewish tradition and carried forward to Easter that the first order of business, when God would clean up the world and make it just, was to raise from the dead all of the martyrs, the saints, and the heroes who died for the faith, who stood up against tyranny, and to bring these sons and daughters back home to their mothers and fathers with their bodies, which had been tortured and dismembered, whole and intact. When you think about it, it's a beautiful tradition which softens the human spirit. But it was never meant to be a physical understanding of Jesus' resurrection from the dead, but he was seen to be seen within that tradition of the martyrs and the heroes of Israel, being resurrected mind, body, and soul. Unfortunately, there are Christian interpreters who have now promoted that as a literal story of Jesus rising from the dead. And apparently, if you don't believe that, every part of that, then you're not a Christian. I want to say to you, you are a Christian if you dissent and if you have a minority viewpoint. The real view that I think has worthwhile for me personally, and it might for you, is that there's much more power in thinking that the disciples and Jesus' friends were not empowered just by perhaps seeing Jesus as a ghost or kind of a risen body at Easter. But maybe they were inspired so much by what he stood for that his love continued to give even after his death. and that his death on a cross could not contain all that God was doing to create a new and better humanity. So they were no longer imprisoned by their tragedies and by the threat of death. They rose up and they formed communities of dissent and protest and of pastoral care to heal the sick. I think this is really the story. As one scholar has said, how many years or decades did Easter last? And it's really a story not of learned helplessness, but of the empowerment of all people, especially those who have been under the domination of a powerful person, or a church, or a corporation, or a nation state. Connect, belong, liberate. You will find at Easter and forever that as you go deeper into your spirit, it opens, and finally opens to reveal that your mind and your personality and your spirit are part of the Christ consciousness. And you are blessed. Now carry a blessing to others. All the best.